Hello, I'm Dazzling One. About last Friday's video that I did was totally unplanned. You probably won't see another one of those surprise ones for a long time, or even a 3-minute video. That is record time for the shortest I've ever made. I just woke up, saw the link, drew a few mental connections, prayed, didn't really write it out and posted the video, logged off, and went straight to school. One thing I do want to say before moving on to today's topic, I was wrong about that being the official ribbon. 49 informed me that she drew it, and she represented it what it might actually look like, but they are still asking for money, and the color green, as many have pointed out, like on Eric Duncan's shirt, still seems to be the color of choice, and many have exposed how much green has been going on, which could still lean to the ideal that it could be linked to symbolism of the pale horse. But enough about Ebola. I'm sure you guys are sick of it, as I am. I mean, even here in Kansas City. See, I'm recording this video right now on Tuesday morning, so by the time you watch it, it'll be Wednesday or after. And on Monday night, they were talking about on my local news in Kansas City that someone could potentially have Ebola, and they're at KU Medical Center, and that's where I went to shadow. So by the time you hear about this, we'll know if it's a scare, if it's another case or not. But either way, Ebola has had its run. I'm sure you can find out plenty more from other people. Let's talk about a more long-term problem, one that I'm unsure I can deliver to you in total. I'm not an economist. My mother works at a bank, and whenever she talks about stuff like that, my head spins. I'm better off at explaining chemistry, which isn't really my forte, than explaining banking. I had to do some research and digging to find the history as well as how deep this conspiracy runs, and even with talking about that, I'm not going to even touch or begin to scratch the surface. Like everything, I want to start with the history to understand where we are now, how we got in this fix, and the future we must understand. And to understand the future, we must understand the past. I believe it was the Ley Lines videos I mentioned fallen angels invented currency. Why I said it? Because it keeps us controlled. Our purpose in Western society is to grow up, go to school, be trained on how to be a good little worker by meeting deadlines, obeying commands, following certain rules, following a belt, then to college, get indoctrinated, learn what we need to do to work, go through training. Actually, the training doesn't even begin until after you graduate with your 4-year degree. Then you can go into training once you get accepted. But up till then, everything's about on your job, you're going to need to know this, and on your job, you're going to need to know that. And the amount of it you use, I'm going through college right now, so I'll find out how much of the stuff I learned I'm really going to apply to my job. So basically, there's really no time to just have fun. It's all school, college, work. And once again, it goes back to the whole Saturn topic, which is an entirely different subject. I can remember growing up with the ideal of college. I hated it. I never wanted to be chained to a specific career, although I would change my mind repeatedly. Reporter, scientist, zoologist, anthropologist, FBI agent. See how diverse my pool of career choices is? And now surgeon, and the list goes on. I find things that really interest me, like writing and art, are considered unrealistic jobs. Why? Because they don't ensure a steady income. I get that's why the rich have an advantage. So that's enough rambling about myself and the whole ordeal with why we have to go to school. The history of banks goes way back to the Knights of Templar. I'm sure most of you have been in a world history or European history class and remember hearing about the Crusades that went on, and the goal was to capture Jerusalem. Others look back at the Crusades and say that the Pope did not declare a holy war for reasons of religion but greed. The plan was drafted November of 1095 by Council of Clermont by Pope Urban II. 300 members of clergy convened. Crusaders slaughtered everyone they met and looted everything they could get their hands on. They murdered indiscriminately those who had taken refuge in the mosque, whether young or old, and devastated the Muslim and Jewish holy sites and places of worship, setting the city's synagogues aflame, burning alive Jews who had hidden inside. The slaughter continued until no longer could they find any to kill. one of the crusaders, Raymond of Aguilar's boast of his incredible cruelty. Wonderful sights were to be seen. Some of our men, and this was more merciful, cut off the heads of their enemies. Others shot them with arrows so that they fell from the towers. Others tortured them longer by casting them into flames. Piles of heads, hands, and feet were to be seen in the streets of the city. It was necessary to pick one's way over the bodies of men and horses, but these were small matters compared to what happened at the Temple of Solomon, a place where the religious services are normally chanted. In the temple and the porch of Solomon, men rode in blood up to their knees and brittle reins. That's not something a history class will teach. Reading that reminds me of a scripture I'm sure everyone's heard of, and that's 1 Timothy 6:10. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. And it's not, a lot of people a lot of times say money is the root of all evil. It's not money itself, but it's the love of it. The things people will do for money. Kill, steal, destroy, enslave, whatever the case may be. People continue to do it to this day. It's nothing new, it's nothing old, it's nothing that's going to ever go away. And it doesn't matter what our currency is, whether it's gold coins, or we're bartering, or we're dealing with dollars, or a new sort of monetary source. Even when you think of the mark of the beast that's coming, people are still going to want to live their lives normal. Nobody's going to want to have to go into hiding. Nobody's going to want to have to be an outcast to society. They're going to want to live in a normal home, and they're going to want to be able to eat and feed their families. And it's going to be that desire which will translate into the mark of the beast, which will be like the new money of the time. But going back to the history of banking, because the Knights of Templar tie into this, the order was founded in 1118 by 9 knights, and I'm probably going to butcher their names, so forgive me. Hugues de Paynes, Geoffrey de Saint Omer, Rosal Godmer, Geoffrey Bissell, Payen de Montadier, Archambaud de Saint Agnat, Andre de Montabard, and the Hugh Comte de Champagne. The Knights of Templar were employed by the Papal to protect pilgrims from robbers and bandits as they traveled to Jerusalem to complete the Lord's work. They were also to record and safeguard possessions placed in their care. This was the beginning of a banking system, in a way, with the nobles entrusting them with goods, and they kept track of it. This worked by having the pilgrims visit a Templar house in their home country where they would deposit their deeds and valuables. In exchange, the Templars would give them a letter describing their holdings, which would form a trusted proof of being good for money. The letters had codes of proof that all order could recognize as being a real letter of credit. There's some disagreement as how the codes were used, but generally it was thought that the letters were encrypted with a cipher alphabet based upon Maltese cross. As a result, whilst traveling, the pilgrims could present their letters to other Templars along the way to withdraw funds from their account. The Knights of Templar received many gifts along their travels as well. They also learned different secrets and mixed mythology together. These are the same guys who would later become known as Freemasons. Notice in Masonry the diverse elements of ancient religions and symbols. They did this for a period of about 200 years until they acquired so much wealth. It is said they may have owned up to 800 castles that were converted to banks. They set up the first banks. The same money got them in trouble. The Knights of Templar had become one of the richest entities in the world over just a few years, and with well-established banks within their monasteries and arguably the best security in the world for those assets. The brother knights found themselves serving in yet another capacity. Nobles and royals alike began to entrust the brother knights with securing their valuables within the safety of the monastery walls under the guard of Templar knights. What took place was the establishment of the safe deposit box. A person turned in their valuables to the monastery for safekeeping, and was then able to retrieve them at their pleasure, just as the case today with the safe deposit box at your local bank. An example, such as a transaction along with language of the documentation and agreement of the withdrawal transaction, is found in a quotation from a primary source document. It was a transaction to retrieve jewels by the James first king of Aragon, from the temple of Mouzon. Because the temple's wealth, they were sought for loans. However, with wealth and power came envy and hostility, with the order eventually disbanding when King Philip VI of France put thousands of them to death in the 14th century in order to plunder their wealth for his war against England. On October 13, 1307, many of the Templars were rounded up, arrested, tortured, and killed, with their leader Jacques de Molay executed by 1314. It is largely unknown what happened to the vast sums of wealth that the Templars had accumulated. Some have even speculated that they were able to alchemically transmute lead into gold, and had discovered treasures of King Solomon while they were stationed at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where there are many much more bizarre stories and theories about the group of knights, some that may be possible. The Grand Master and hundreds of Templars were arrested and imprisoned all across Europe. The fate of those captured and held in France was horrific, more so than anywhere else in the known world. Starvation and torture were used unsparingly to extract confessions and confirmation of Philip's ridiculous list of crimes. Many confessed to stop the torture and were gifted with a quick death. Others never broke at all and died in custody. Jacques de Molay confessed under torture, then recanted, earning him Philip's wrath, and he became the target of Philip's frustration and never finding the Templars' treasure. On March 18th, 1314, Jacques de Molay and several of his brothers-in-arms were slowly roasted at the stake for their crimes against the crown. Legend has it that he burned. Jacques de Molay cursed the three men he held responsible for his personal agony and the persecution of his order. Philip the Fair, Pope Clement V, and Chevalier Guillaume de Nogaret, the king's Grand Inquisitor, he said in effect that these three men would follow him to the grave within a year. I order you to appear before the tribunal of God. Cursed are you all, cursed until the 13th generation. Pope Clement V died on April 20th, 1314 from a virulent bacterial infection. I'm probably not saying that right, de Nogaret was poisoned to death on April 27th, 1314, and Philip the Fair died on November 29th, 1314, due to a fatal fall from his horse during a boar hunt. The curse supposedly ended the decapitation. The 16th, the 13th king from the Capetinian line, Philip's descendants. One of the legends stemming from this time is that when Louis's head had fallen into the basket, an unidentified man leapt up onto the platform, dipped his hand in the king's blood, and cried, Jacques de Molay, tu es vengé. I'm probably not saying that right because I can't speak French. And Jacques de Molay, thou art avenged. Okay, so you got that history on the Knights of Templar. I read from various sources that I'll leave in the description box. Some of them are a little more biased. But one thing that I personally believe about the Knights of Templar is that they're today's Freemasons, and they're linked to a lot of our world bankers today. So after they basically were persecuted, they then moved their operations to Switzerland and set up over there. And if you notice the similarity of the Swiss flag to the Knights of Templar. Since then, families like the Rothschilds and many more, which is getting into the 13 bloodlines. And someone reminded me of doing a video on it, I really do. They managed to gain control over every bank through central banks. In the year 1694, the Bank of England was established. It was the first central bank, followed by Mayer and Michel Rothschild, extended his banking empire across Europe by carefully placing his 5 sons in key positions. They set up banks in Frankfurt, Vienna, London, Naples, and Paris. By the mid-1800s, they dominated the banking industry, lending to governments around the world and people such as the Vanderbilts, Carnegies, Cecil Rhodes. 1757, currency was printed called colonialship. Alright, I'm reading from a timeline. So, if I'm going in chronological order just to set the background of the evolution of the banks up till now. In 1791, Congress creates the first U.S. Bank, a private company partly owned by the foreigners to handle the financial needs of the new central government. Previously, the 13 states had their own banks, currencies, and financial institutions. In 1832, Andrew Jackson campaigns against the Second Bank of the U.S. and vetoes bank charter renewal. Andrew Jackson was skeptical of the central banking system and believed it gave too few men too much power and caused inflation. He was also a proponent of gold and silver and an outspoken opponent of the Second National Bank. The charter expired in 1836. In 1833, President Jackson issued executive order to stop depositing government funds into banks of the U.S. By September of 1833, government funds were being deposited into state chartered banks. On January 30th of 1835, Jackson escapes assassination. The assassins misfired twice. Between the years of 1833 and 1837, manufactured boom created by central bankers' money supply increases 84%, and spurred by the Second Bank of the U.S. The total money supply rose from 150 million to 167 million. In the years between 1837 to 1843, a terrible depression occurred. 343 of 850 banks in the U.S. closed entirely as the largest banks consolidated wealth and power. In 1862 to 1863, Lincoln overrules debt-based money and issues greenbacks to fund the war. Bankers would only lend the government money under certain conditions at a high interest rate, so Lincoln issued his own currency, greenbacks, through the U.S. Treasury and made them legal tender. His soldiers went on to win the war, followed by a great economic expansion. And then, of course, on April 15th, 1865, Lincoln was assassinated. In 1881, President James Garfield, staunch proponent of honest money backed by gold and silver, was assassinated. Garfield opposed flat currency, money that was not backed by any physical object, and was a strong advocate of bimetal monetary system. He had second shortest presidency in history. In 1907, there was the banking panic of 1907. The New York Stock Exchange dropped dramatically as everyone tried to get their money out of the banks at the same time across the nation. This banking panic spurred debate for banking reform. J.P. Morgan and others gathered to create an image of concern and stability in the face of panic, which eventually led to the formation of the Federal Reserve. Founders of the Federal Reserve pretended like the bankers were opposed to the ideal of its formation in order to mislead the public into believing that the Federal Reserve would help to regulate bankers, when in fact it really gave even more power to private bankers, but in a less transparent way. In 1908, J.P. Morgan associate and Rockefeller relative Nelson Aldrich heads the new National Monetary Commission. Senate Republican leader Nelson Aldrich heads the new National Monetary Commission that was created to study the cause of the banking panic. Aldrich had close ties with J.P. Morgan, and his daughter married John D. Rockefeller. In 1910, bankers meet secretly on Jekyll Island to draft the Federal Reserve banking legislation. Over the course of a week, some of the nation's most powerful bankers met secretly off the coast of Georgia, drafting a proposal for a private central banking system. Those in attendance included Nelson Aldrich, A.P. Andrew, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, Paul Warburg, Kuhn, Loeb and Co., Frank Vanderlip, President of National City Bank of New York, Charles D. Norton, President of the Morgan-dominated First National Bank of New York, Henry Davidson, Senior Partner of J.P. Morgan Co., and Benjamin Strong, representing J.P. Morgan. And then, of course, on December 23rd, 1913, because last year was its 100th anniversary, the Federal Reserve Act passed. 2 days before Christmas, while many members of Congress were away on vacation, the Federal Reserve Act was passed, creating the central banking system we have today. It was based on the Aldrich Plan drafted on Jekyll Island and gave private bankers supreme authority over the economy. They are now able to create money out of the nothing and loan it out of interest, makes decisions without government approval, and controls the amount of money in circulation. In 1913, income tax was established. 16th Amendment ratified. Taxes ensure that citizens would cover the payment of debt due to the central bank. The Federal Reserve, which was also created in 1913, the 16th Amendment stated, "The Congress shall have power to lay and collect money and collect taxes on incomes from whatever sources derived without apportionment among the several states, and with regard to any census of enumeration." In 1914, J.P. Morgan & Co. profits from financing both sides of the war and purchasing weapons. J.P. Morgan & Co. made a deal with the Bank of England to give them a monopoly on underwriting war bonds for the UK and France. They also invested in suppliers of war equipment to Britain and France. November of 1914, Federal Reserve Bank opens. 1921 to 1920, the Roaring Twenties, the Federal Reserve floods the economy with cash and credit. From 1921 to 1926, the Federal Reserve increased the money supply to $28 billion, almost a 62% increase over an 8-year period. This artificially created another boom. In 1929, the Federal Reserve contracts the money supply. In 1921, the Federal Reserve begins to pull money out of circulation as loans were paid back. They created a bust, which was inevitable after ensuing so much credit in the years before. The Federal Reserve actions triggered the banking crisis, which led to the Great Depression. On October 24, 1929, Black Thursday, stock markets crash. The most devastating stock market crash in history. Billions of dollars in value were consolidated into private bankers' hands at the expense of everyone else. Well, guys, the Great Depression that you learn about at the time of the central banks. I really like this site. It puts it all into perspective, year by year. Like I said, I'll have a link down below and you can read it for yourself. There's also suspicion considering the fact that many bankers have died this year mysteriously, which leads many to believe that some sort of economic collapse is coming. Talking about the history and getting back, and like I said, I didn't even go into as much depth if I could have went into. You see a pattern how the families have managed to take control over many of the central banks, get their hooks in, and now if you control someone's currency, you basically control their life. Because what do we work for? We work to make money. That money we work for, then we spend it to live, to feed ourselves. Some people feed their kids, whatever the case is. When you control money, you control everyone's life. The same people who control the money also are the same people who control the media. They control what we're being told and what we're being taught. So that's very important. And they also control our entertainment industry, what we're being entertained with. And like someone told me in the past, enter for detainment. The point is that when you start to understand the economic aspect of this, you start to understand if that is corrupted. Even if you're a skeptic about everything else, you then begin to realize that maybe there's other holes in the story that we're not being told. But the thing is, this is very important because we look at modern day issues like ISIS, Ebola, enterovirus, all kinds of different little things that we see. Even when the ALS Bucket Challenge was popular, we got to remember who's making this popular. Who's making sure that it gets media attention? Who's making sure that these scare tactics are used, whether they're real or fake? The point is that we have to look back at the banking system and see. And as we can see, there's something very fishy and corrupt, and something's not right there. And I know I've heard people say that maybe we should just stop using the money. We should stop using the currency. I honestly think that'd be a great idea, except the problem is there's not going to be enough people who would stop using money and stop using currency. Someone I know who fought in the war in Iraq told me that it's their belief that one of the reasons we invaded Iraq was simply to set up more banks, get more central banks set up, and people like the Rothschilds wanted to do that, I wouldn't be surprised that every time an invasion occurs, they don't want to set up a bank, because the more places they set up the bank, the more control they have over those individuals' lives. And eventually they're going to throw out money, they're going to throw out all of that stuff, and it's just going to be a one world currency. And that one world currency will then translate into the mark of the beast. It's all interconnected, everything. And there's so many topics to touch on: drugs, prostitution, the whole banking conspiracy, the paranormal aspect. But when we're looking at this, in a man-made sense, these same people who are a lot of times are involved in the esoteric side of things, they're also the same people who are controlling our banks. So even if you don't believe in this stuff, still these same people are the same people that are running your life indirectly. Because as long as you are paying for things with cash, or you're using the currency and that the banks are supplying, and you have your money in the bank, and you have to get a loan, and you have to do that, then it's still an indirect form of control. And that's really all I wanted to say for now. Like I said, there's so much more I could have touched on, I could have talked about, because I'm not an expert on banking and the economy and all of that. And I know a lot of people have predicted an economic crash coming in the near future, whether it's this year, next year, whatever year. It's inevitable. It's going to occur. They're going to get tired of using cash. I think they're ready to move on to the next thing, whether it's the Amero, or it's something completely different. And some people are saying the RFID chip, or of course the mark of the beast. But only time will be able to tell what comes out of all of this. But I hope that at least by going through the brief history, seeing the corruption, and talking about it, we can remember this long-term conspiracy as well. And I hope you learned something from this. I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful week. I'll talk to you next week, and God bless you.